Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Good morning. Each year on Rosh HaShanah, our Torah readings are the consecutive and interwoven stories of the near deaths of Ishmael on day 1 and the near death of Isaac this morning on day 2. Each year, we try to figure out exactly why the rabbis chose these stories of all the Torah stories that they could have chosen to read at the start of the new year. And we try to understand what these stories, in all honesty, these somewhat strange stories, in many ways awful stories, might mean for us. And as this new year begins, perhaps even more so than in other years, we desperately need to find some helpful and hopeful meaning in it. Our new year arrives amidst, and you can fill in the blank with whatever most concerns and troubles you, from an ongoing and resurgent world pandemic to growing world anti-Semitism, to renewing threats of terrorism or nuclear Iran, to climate change, you name it. None of us is immune, I'm sure, to at least an occasional bout of hopelessness. Yet here we are in Rosh HaShanah, the start of a new year with the potential to be better than last year. And this is what we do during the high holidays. We look to make amends on what went wrong last year and to change for the better in the year to come. Rosh Hashanah needs to be a hopeful holiday, a redemptive holiday. And as I discussed yesterday, this Rosh Hashanah is the start of a Shnat Shemitah, a 7th year, a sabbatical year, which presents an opportunity for radical change and improvement. As the title of our Israeli national anthem attests, our heartfelt hope abides. Hope is essential to who we are, and we can never let ourselves give up on it. So what can we do? How can we live with this inescapable tension between concern and optimism? How can we nevertheless be sustained by hope rather than to succumb to fear? A profound answer is found in our Rosh Hashanah Torah readings. So yesterday we read chapter 21 of Bereshit, Genesis, which begins with the birth of Isaac. This was the beginning of Jewish history, a history of survival, continuity, and destiny. And after just 6 Torah verses into Isaac's story, however, the focus shifts to the time when Abraham and Sarah expel Hagar and Ishmael out into the desert, jeopardizing their lives. You know, there's a shared theme between yesterday's and today's Torah readings, between Ishmael's story and the story of Isaac. That shared theme is called the fragile preciousness of life. The story of Isaac's near sacrifice, called Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac that we read this morning, seemingly repudiates this idea of old of child sacrifice. The story of Hagar and Ishmael, which might just as well be called Akedat Ishmael, the trial of Ishmael, also celebrates the value of life. The stories are related, just like Isaac and Ishmael are related. The stories of these 2 boys are in dialogue with one another, inseparable, just like Jews and Arabs. We are half siblings, whether we like it or not. The similarities of the 2 stories is actually quite amazing. In both stories, the fathers that these 2 boys share, Abraham, acts obediently. Vayashkem Avraham v'yikach. We read the same exact words in both stories, that Abraham rose up early and took action to fulfill God's mysterious will in connection to the fates of his sons. In today's reading, Abraham obediently went to sacrifice Isaac. In yesterday's reading, Abraham obediently went to expel Hagar and Ishmael from the tent into the desert wilderness. Both of these stories embody grave ethical dilemmas. And we can only assume that Abraham is nearly overwhelmed with guilt and sadness as he exiles Ishmael, denying his status as the firstborn. Surely Abraham then becomes overwhelmed again when he sets out to sacrifice the life of Isaac, the child he's waited for his entire life. The death of each son seems certain in both stories until, out of the blue, an angel of God calls to the parent. Upon hearing the angel, both Abraham and Hagar open or lift up their eyes to see the instrument of salvation. As if they were blind beforehand, they can suddenly then see the light. They find the insight they need to save their children's lives. Both Hagar and then Abraham recognize the God who sees. The respective sites of these miraculous events were called, as we've been reading, Be'er Lachai Roi, the well of the vision of life, and Bahar Adonai Yireh, the mountain of God who sees. From near extinction then, both children miraculously received the blessings of being destined to great nationhood, all because of the ability to see. My great teacher, Rabbi Ben Hollander, Zichrono Livracha, takes these similarities in the two stories a step further. He helps us imagine the human reality that must have been behind what happens in these stories. So think back to yesterday's reading of chapter 21, as Abraham expels Hagar and Ishmael from home. You can imagine Isaac and Sarah standing in the tent, watching as Abraham casts them out into the burning desert. Sarah, with her arms crossed, a satisfied smile on her face, as Abraham does what she demanded that he do. Hagar and Ishmael are probably both hysterical and angry, yet perhaps resigned to their fate, petrified at the impending danger of being made refugees, cast out into the wilderness. The Torah suggests that Abraham had a sense of trepidation, but he expels them nevertheless, perhaps with a sense of regretfulness. Then there's little Isaac, a young boy clutching at his mother's skirt, watching uncomprehendingly, but surely sensing the drama and wondering what the commotion is all about. He could not know that that very same act of Vayashkem Avraham Baboker, and Abraham arose early in the morning, would repeat itself in the very next chapter, what we read this morning. And Isaac himself would be similarly exiled and put in a life-threatening situation. And Sarah, remember her standing there smugly in chapter 21, watching her triumph, is oblivious to Isaac's trial coming in the very next chapter. She cannot know that while Hagar will have a brush with death in the desert, she herself will be taken by death. According to the Midrash, she dies of shock upon learning that her only son was taken away to be sacrificed. Rabbi Hollander describes this scene and notes unforgettably, we are looking at ourselves and our children all the time and not knowing, any of us, what will be the life and death of our loved ones. That's our situation today. That's our situation always. The ancient rendering of what happened 4,000 years ago, with all its nuances, is speaking about us. Our future is uncertain, as we certainly must admit, while a world pandemic continues, as the climate changes, as, well, you can fill in that blank a second time. Like Sarah, we are oblivious to what is just around the corner. So how do we cope in difficult times? How do we protect ourselves as best we can from the world, not only physically, but also spiritually? What kind of life will we lead in contending with the difficult world that is all around us? It's God's behavior in these Rosh HaShanah Torah readings that shows us a way. First, God hears the cry of the child. God senses the anguish of the parent. God sees what is about to happen, and God acts. God intervenes. God helps the parents open their eyes, gives them the insight to the salvation of their children's lives so near at hand, but which in their blindness they could not see. That well of water, that goat caught in the thicket. We need to open our eyes to see what solutions are near at hand, what the possible solutions might be. We have to believe that God does not want the children sacrificed. not to God, not to war, not to the poisoning of their souls by hatred, fear, or humiliation, not Ishmael and not Isaac. Both must live, and both must be great nations together, siblings. Second, at the conclusion of the Akedat Ishmael story in Genesis 21, verse number 17, Ishmael has been put under a shade bush by his mom, Hagar, who feels that she can do nothing more to help him, and yet she can't bear his suffering. She moves off a ways, waiting for him to die. God personally intervenes to save the life of Ishmael. As we read, and God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of the heaven and said to her, "What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the child where he is." There's a very famous midrash, I'm sure that you're familiar with, based on this problem of why God says that God heard the voice of the child where he was dying of thirst, Ba'asher hu sham, where he is. Why does it need to say where he is? Obviously, that's where the child is and what the dire circumstances are. The midrash suggests that the angels were pleading with God to let Ishmael die of thirst. If you don't, say those angels, his descendants, the Arab peoples, will kill your children Israel. Don't show him the well of water. God responds, what is this child at this moment? A tzaddik or a rasha? An innocent one or a guilty one? A righteous person or a wicked? Right now, he is a child dying in the desert. The angels had no choice but to admit that at that moment, where he is, Ishmael is tzaddik, not yet a wicked one. And God says, I hear the voice of the lad, Ba'asher hu sham, where he is at this moment, who he is at this very moment. The lesson for us to take on this difficult language, the very difficult challenge, is to encounter others where they are, recognizing in ourselves and in others that basic humanity, the basic holiness that we share as beings created in the divine image. Yes, good judgment is required, and our true enemies, the Rasha, the wicked ones, must be opposed and punished, if not altogether destroyed. But we cannot presume that everyone is our enemy. This is our spiritual danger, that we will look at the world with a total us-them mentality, that we will cease to see the individual human stories behind the abstractions of who they are, that we will see them as, first of all, a threat, a likely or potential dangerous enemy, rather than, at first glance, a possible friend, possible partner for progress, or even a long-lost sibling. The danger for us is that we will look out at the world through fear and see no hope. Recall Isaac's voice in our story this morning. I believe this was the part that Barbara was reading so beautifully. Isaac's voice is of confidence and hope. He asked, where's the lamb for the offering? There's no hint of bitterness, no presumption that he is being victimized. Then he retreats into himself. He remains himself. And with his heartfelt hope intact, quietly confident and faithful that the ambiguity and obscurity of God's plans for him will work out somehow, that God values life, that parents do not sacrifice their children, not for territory, not for the short-term gain, but the long-term loss of an economy that is environmentally destructive, not for a flag, not even for God. The poet Yehuda Amichai captured in words a moment that is like the stories of the Bible, human moments through which shine forth our true nature as children of one God. One of many moments that are happening all the time, if we will only open our eyes and see them for what they are. Amichai famously writes about the Hinnom Valley, where the Sultan's pool is, that he's going to refer to in the poem that I'm about to read, where it's situated there near his home in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Mishkanot Shananim on one side and Mount Zion on the other. The Hinnom Valley, Gei Ben Hinnom in Hebrew, Gehenna in Yiddish, known as the Valley of Hell, because there in ancient times, what happened? Children were sacrificed to the fiery god Malach. In that very same place, in his own day, Amichai describes in a poem how an Arab shepherd is searching for his goat on Mount Zion. And on the opposite hill, I'm searching for my little boy, an Arab shepherd and a Jewish father, both in their temporary failure. Our two voices met above the Sultan's pool in the valley between us. Neither one of us wants the boy or the goat to get caught in the wheels of the awful Chad Gadya machine. Afterward, we found them among the bushes, and our voices came back inside us, laughing and crying. Searching for a goat or for a child has always been the beginning of a new religion in these mountains. May this be a year of searching and finding, a year of opening our eyes and seeing solutions, a year of sibling peace, both in our homes and in the Middle East. May this be a year of heartfelt hope. May our good hopes be realized and attained. Kein Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will. Shana Tova Umetuka.